The perfect fiancé, a loving family. It was all a lie. Their family values are a brutal survival test for each of his girlfriends. The previous one didn't pass and died. Now it's my turn. He looked me in the eyes and said, "It was an interview." I didn't know that the price of failure was my life. Mason's car moved in silence, its tires barely whispering over the flawless black asphalt of the private road. The forest, dense and primal, stood like a wall on either side, weaving a dark canopy of pine branches overhead. Chloe watched the blur of tree trunks, her own reflection gliding across the tinted glass, pale and foreign. The road wound on for several miles, cutting them off from civilization, from the noise and hustle of New York City, which they had left only a couple of hours before. When the house finally appeared from around a bend, it stole her breath away. It wasn't a house. It was a statement. A cold monolith of polished gray concrete and massive floor-to-ceiling glass panels inserted into the wild landscape with surgical precision. It didn't blend with nature. It dominated it. Its geometry was perfect and merciless. Mason, her fiancé, had designed this place himself. His creation. Chloe tried to force a smile, but the muscles in her face wouldn't obey. She imagined the warmth of a fireplace reflecting in those glass walls, but her mind could only conjure cold, empty glares. The car stopped on a pad of dark gravel that crunched softly under the wheels. The front door opened before Mason could even cut the engine. Andrew and Helen Sterling stood on the threshold. He was tall and imposing, with a heavy jaw and a piercing gaze from gray eyes under thick silver brows. She was elegant, flawless, with a perfect platinum hairstyle and the face of a porcelain doll, frozen in a polite smile honed over years. "Chloe, welcome," Helen said, her voice melodic and utterly devoid of emotion. Chloe stepped out of the car into the cool evening air, which smelled of pine and damp earth. She extended her hand to Helen, then to Andrew. Their handshakes were brief, dry. She felt like a butterfly under a microscope, being carefully examined before being pinned to a board. In the enormous hall, flooded with cold light, she was enveloped by the scent of ozone from the air purifiers and some expensive, impersonal fragrance. It didn't smell like a home. It smelled like a gallery. Her professional intuition, usually dormant in her personal life, was now sending a faint but persistent alarm. The initial unease took on a physical form. A slight chill ran down her spine, making her unconsciously touch the thin white scar on her wrist. The dinner took place in a vast living room that felt more like a private airport lounge. The space, with its two-story ceilings, was oppressively empty. The furniture, a low-slung graphite sofa and a pair of designer armchairs, was arranged so far apart that it precluded any possibility of an intimate conversation. An entire wall was made of glass, and beyond it began the impenetrable darkness of the forest. Chloe felt like an actress on a stage, exposed to unseen spectators lurking among the trees. The conversation was quiet and measured. Andrew inquired about her latest investigative piece, while Helen asked about the wedding plans. Every word, every phrase seemed part of a long-rehearsed ritual. This oppressive, sterile atmosphere was shattered by the arrival of Alex. He appeared in the doorway silently, as if materialized from thin air. Dressed in a designer hoodie and limited-edition sneakers, with perpetually tousled blonde hair, he was a living dissonance in this kingdom of order. "And here she is, the future star of the Sterling family," Alex exclaimed, his loud, energetic voice echoing off the concrete walls. He approached Chloe and extended his hand with a disarmingly boyish grin. His handshake was warm and firm. He instantly filled the space, showering Chloe with compliments and jokes about her serious profession, asking if she was planning to write an exposé on their boring family. For a moment, Chloe felt an immense sense of relief. Here he was, a living, real person in this cold mausoleum. She laughed, and for the first time that evening, her laughter was genuine. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Mason observing the scene with an approving, slightly condescending smirk, like a director pleased with how his best actor was brilliantly performing his role. Over dessert, when the tension seemed to have eased, Alex decided to entertain everyone with a story. "Chloe, do you know how Mason won his first major competition in college?" he began, mischievous sparks dancing in his light gray eyes. Mason tried to stop him with exaggerated embarrassment, but Alex just waved him off. "There was this one upstart," Alex continued, enjoying the rapt attention. "Incredibly talented, but with a terrible attitude. So, my brilliant brother didn't compete with him on blueprints. He simply hacked his university email and sent a couple of very explicit letters in his name to the dean and the wife of a tenured professor on the scholarship committee. The guy was expelled a week later, and Mason got the grant." Alex finished the story with a loud laugh. His parents smiled with restrained, polite amusement. Chloe forced herself to smile too, but her gaze was fixed on Mason, and in that instant, she saw it. For a split second, before he joined in the general merriment, his face became a cold, impenetrable mask. The smile vanished, and in his dark brown eyes, a predatory, utterly ruthless gleam flashed and died. This fleeting expression of absolute indifference to another person's ruined fate frightened Chloe more than the story itself. A sticky, cold residue settled in her soul, poisoning the taste of the expensive dessert. Later, after dinner had concluded and the parents had retired to their quarters, Chloe went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The kitchen was an extension of the house, stainless steel surfaces, built-in appliances, not a single superfluous detail. She was pouring water when Alex's quiet voice sounded behind her. "You're nothing like Kate." Chloe flinched and spun around. Alex was leaning against the doorframe, studying her intently. His playful mood had vanished, replaced by a strange, appraising curiosity. She was so ethereal, so creative. "A true artist," he continued, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Too fragile for our world. People like that get broken here." He uttered the last word almost inaudibly, with a poorly concealed relish. He wasn't looking at Chloe, but somewhere through her. In that moment, his friendly mask cracked, and behind it, Chloe saw an icy, indifferent core. He wasn't sympathizing with the dead girl. He was stating a fact about her unsuitability for their system. Goosebumps prickled on Chloe's arms. She silently picked up her glass and walked out of the kitchen, feeling his piercing, analytical gaze on her back. Later that night, in the perfect silence of the minimalist bedroom, where even the ticking of a clock would have been a disturbance, Chloe lay awake. Every detail of the evening replayed in her mind, assembling into a disturbing picture. She turned to Mason, who was reading a book by the light of a designer lamp. "Mason," she began softly, "your brother makes me a little uneasy." She told him about the conversation in the kitchen, about the strange tone he used when he said the word broken. Mason put his book down and looked at her with masterfully feigned concern. He pulled her close, hugged her, and kissed her forehead. His voice, deep and soothing, poured into her ears like a balm. "Sweetheart, you're just on edge. Meeting the family is always stressful. Alex is a bit eccentric, an artistic soul. He says things without thinking. He was just trying so hard to impress you. Don't you think I'd notice if something was wrong? Trust me. I love you." His logic was flawless. His embrace was warm. His love seemed so sincere. Chloe fell silent, a wave of guilt washing over her. She felt like a paranoid fool, unjustly accusing the family of the man she loved. She forced herself to believe his words. It was the only way to preserve the fragile peace she was so afraid of losing. The morning began with strained smiles and icy politeness. At breakfast, Mason was pointedly attentive, pouring Chloe orange juice and asking how she slept, as if their nighttime conversation had never happened. Andrew and Helen discussed prices for an upcoming antiques auction, their voices even and detached. Chloe tried to participate, smiling, but every word felt stuck in her throat, every movement a sham. She felt like an actress in a play she'd never been cast in, surrounded by a picture-perfect family from a magazine, while she alone was suffocating from the unspoken tension, seeing the ugly cracks in the flawless facade. After breakfast, Mason led Chloe to his second-floor office, another sterile space with a huge desk and a panoramic window. He spread out the blueprints for their future home, talking about the garden, the nursery, the terrace for their morning coffee. But his words, which would have sounded magical to her just yesterday, now rang hollow and false. Chloe stared at the perfect lines on the paper and saw only another cage. "Mason, we need to talk about Alex," she began again, unable to pretend any longer. Mason's face hardened. "Chloe, stop it. I'm not having this pointless conversation again. You're ruining the weekend for everyone with your fantasies." The coldness in his voice was the final straw. The feeling of claustrophobia that had been building since her arrival finally broke through. "I need some air," she snapped, standing up abruptly. Ignoring his protests, Chloe nearly ran out of the office. She needed space, solitude. She needed to escape this house, if only for a little while. Chloe found refuge in the immense, spotless garage, which smelled of expensive cars and polish. A few bicycles were lined up against the wall. She was choosing the simplest one when Alex suddenly appeared from behind a rack of tools, wiping his hands on a clean rag. "Going for a ride? Great idea!" he exclaimed, with feigned enthusiasm. "Don't take that one, it's old. Take this one, the downhill bike. I just tuned it up and greased it myself yesterday. It flies like a rocket, and the brakes are beasts." He rolled a black, aggressive-looking bike with thick tires toward her with such sincere concern that Chloe felt a momentary pang of guilt for her suspicions. Maybe she really was being unfair. She thanked him, wheeled the bike onto the driveway, and failed to notice the predatory, anticipatory glint in his light gray eyes. The first 10 minutes of the ride were pure liberation. The speed, the wind in her face, the physical exertion, it all helped to clear her head of paranoid thoughts. Chloe sped along the winding forest road, leaving the oppressive atmosphere of the museum-like house behind. A long, steep descent appeared ahead, disappearing into the shade of ancient pines. Enjoying the speed, she decided to brake slightly before entering the turn. She squeezed the brake levers lightly, effortlessly, and nothing happened. The handles went limp, pressing all the way to the handlebars without any resistance. A primal chill of terror shot down her spine. The bike, hurtling downhill at an ever-increasing speed, was completely out of control. Her freedom had turned into a death trap. The panic lasted a split second before being replaced by a cold, sharp instinct honed by her work as a journalist. Options flashed through her mind in slow motion. The turn ahead was too sharp for this speed. To the left, beyond a low guardrail, was a rocky cliff. To the right, a dense wall of forest. It was a choice between certain death and a chance at survival. Gathering all her strength, she pushed off the pedals, shifted her weight, and, with desperate resolve, steered the bike to the right into the thick undergrowth. There was a deafening crack of breaking branches, a sharp pain as her body was battered, and the last thing she felt before the world went dark was a hard, dull impact with the ground. Chloe came to, the smell of damp leaves and the sharp pain all over her body her first sensations. She was lying several yards from the road, tangled in broken bushes. She managed to lift her head, a ringing in her ears. Through it, she heard the snap of a twig nearby. From between the trees, from the direction of the ravine, not the house, Alex emerged. He wasn't running. He was walking at a brisk, confident pace, his expensive hoodie unblemished. "Chloe! Oh my God! I saw you flying down the hill and cut through the woods to head you off," he shouted. But his voice held not concern, but poorly concealed impatience. His presence here, at this spot, at this moment, was physically impossible. If he had run from the house, he would have come from behind, along the road. But he had emerged from the front, from the direction of the cliff. Lying on the ground amid the wreckage of the bike and broken branches, Chloe watched Alex approach. Her mind, trained to find inconsistencies and connect facts, was working at its limit. His help in the garage, his lie about the checked brakes, his unnatural, impossible appearance here. And she understood. He hadn't run to help her. He had gone down earlier and waited below by the turn. He was waiting to hear the crash and confirm that everything had gone according to plan. In that moment, looking into his concerned eyes, Chloe saw only cold, predatory satisfaction. The trap had sprung, and the hunt had just begun. Limping, leaning on Alex's shoulder, Chloe stumbled into the living room. Her clothes were dirty, and fresh scrapes colored her arms and face. The disarray looked shockingly alien in the sterile cleanliness of the Sterling home. Mason and his parents were sitting in their designer chairs with glasses of wine, their conversation cut short. They looked at Chloe not with alarm, but with a kind of squeamish bewilderment, as if she were a stray dog that had wandered into an embassy reception. "He did it!" Chloe cried out, her voice breaking with a mixture of rage and fear. She pushed Alex away and pointed a trembling finger at him. "The brakes! He cut them!" Mason slowly set his glass on the table. He stood up, his face showing not anger, but a deep, almost theatrical sorrow. He walked over to Chloe, ignoring her accusation, his gaze full of disappointment. He turned to his brother with an exaggerated, mocking concern. "Alex, bring the first aid kit, would you? You see what her nerves have driven her to." That sentence, delivered in front of his frozen parents, was a gut punch. Her desperate accusation had been transformed into a symptom of hysteria, a regrettable display of female instability. Chloe faltered, the words dying in her throat. She saw Helen press her lips together in a thin line and Andrew turn away to face the panoramic window, signaling that the scene was over. While Mason carefully, almost surgically, cleaned Chloe's scrapes with an antiseptic wipe, his voice was low and persuasive. He didn't look her in the eye. His focus was on her wounds, as if they were the problem, not her words. "Sweetheart, think logically. What's the motive? Why would Alex do that? You're our guest, my fiancé. This is an old house, old equipment. Accidents happen, especially when someone is on edge and out of their element." His touch was gentle, almost intimate, but his words were a poison, drip by drip destroying her confidence. He wasn't arguing with her. He wasn't refuting her. He was helping her see the irrationality of her own fears. Alex, standing nearby with the open first aid kit, watched the scene with a mixture of curiosity and admiration, like a student observing a master at work. Chloe fell silent, disarmed and humiliated. She felt like she was going insane. Maybe she had imagined it all. Chloe locked herself in the bedroom, but no sense of safety came. She leaned her back against the cold, smooth door, trying to still her trembling. The panoramic window, which had seemed like a luxurious design element by day, had now become a giant black eye through which the dark, hostile forest watched her. The house, initially just cold, now felt like a living, malevolent organism. She pulled out her phone to call a friend, to vent, to hear a sane voice from the outside world. But the screen glowed with a short, merciless message. No service. She remembered Mason proudly saying he had designed the house like a Faraday cage, so that nothing from the outside world could disturb their seclusion. Now that word, cage, took on a sinister, literal meaning. She was cut off, isolated. Every sound in the house, the click of the climate control, the low hum of hidden wiring, made her flinch, becoming a harbinger of threat. An unnatural, oppressive silence reigned at dinner. It was broken only by the quiet, melodic clinking of silverware on porcelain. Everyone pretended the bicycle incident hadn't happened. Helen discussed an upcoming charity auction. Andrew sustained the conversation with brief, weighty remarks. Mason was pointedly solicitous, passing Chloe the salad, asking if she needed anything else. His attention was suffocating. At one point, wanting to demonstrate complete composure and return the conversation to polite society, Mason turned to Chloe with a warm smile. "Darling, would you be a dear and go down to the cellar for that 1982 Bordeaux my father gave us? I think now is the perfect moment to open it." The request was a form of sophisticated torture. To refuse meant causing a scene and confirming her status as an unstable hysteric. To agree meant voluntarily walking into the beast's lair, into the part of the house that seemed the most ominous. Under the expectant gazes of the Sterlings, under Mason's calm, loving stare, she slowly rose from the table. "Of course, dear." The heavy, unadorned cellar door opened into a darkness that smelled of damp, mold, and oblivion. A single, dim, bare bulb hanging from a long wire snatched a steep, creaking wooden staircase from the gloom. Chloe took the first step, and the sound of her heel echoed loudly, lonely, in the silence. She gripped the dusty, rough railing, her palms instantly slick with sweat. With each step down, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the tension mounted. The air grew thick, heavy. She felt like a character in a Gothic novel descending into the family crypt where something terrible awaited. It seemed she could hear someone breathing in the darkness below, though her mind told her it was only the frantic beating of her own heart. Halfway down, with a light from the bulb barely reached and the shadows grew thick and viscous, the step beneath Chloe's foot exploded with a dry, deafening crack. Her leg plunged into the void. The world flipped for a moment. The pain of the impact and the terror of the fall merged into a single, silent scream trapped in her throat. She instinctively clung to the railing, dangling over the darkness. A sharp splinter from the broken board dug into her shin, warm blood trickling down her leg. She hung there in absolute silence, paralyzed, knowing that in another moment her sweaty fingers would slip, and she would fall into the blackness below. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open, flooding the staircase with life-saving light. Alex stood in the doorway. There wasn't a trace of surprise on his face. He looked down at her with the same cold curiosity a child might show a trapped insect. "Well, what do you know? I was just on my way to check the circuit breaker," he said in a mundane tone, utterly devoid of alarm. "Careful, Chloe. I told you the stairs were old." He descended quickly and easily, deftly stepping over the broken section, and offered her his hand. His grip was like steel, and his light gray eyes held no sympathy or concern, only a cold, analytical interest. He wasn't saving her. He was simply putting a broken toy back in its place to continue his cruel game. Back in her room, limping, With a new bleeding scrape on her leg, Chloe faced the large mirror. She stared at her reflection, disheveled, eyes burning with a mixture of fury and humiliation, her expensive clothes stained with dirt. The tears of despair and pain had dried, leaving behind a cold, crystalline rage. She understood now. Her feelings, her words, her instincts. To them, these were merely symptoms of hysteria, inconvenient glitches in their perfect world. They wouldn't believe her because they didn't want to. In that moment, the journalist inside her awoke, the part of her that trusted only facts. She would no longer be a victim crying for help. She would become an investigator. And she would gather irrefutable proof to break this case, no matter the cost. After waiting for the voices downstairs to fade and the house to fall into silence, Chloe held her breath and slipped out of her room. Barefoot, to make no sound, she tiptoed down the long, echoing hallway to the guest wing, to Kate's room. The old wooden door opened almost silently. The room greeted her with the scent of dust, lavender, and the faint, ghostly aroma of floral perfume. It was a space frozen in time, a memorial to a forgotten life. Feeling like both a grave robber and Kate's only chance for justice, Chloe began a methodical, swift search. She moved like a professional, not turning everything upside down, but carefully checking each drawer, each book, each fold of a forgotten scarf on a chair. She wasn't just looking for an object. She was looking for an echo, a confirmation, a weapon. Deep in the bottom drawer of an old dresser, beneath a stack of yellowed art gallery pamphlets, her fingers brushed against something hard and smooth. It was a wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She carefully pulled it out and opened it. Inside, nestled on a lining of faded navy blue velvet, was a small embossed leather-bound notebook. A diary. She opened it with trembling hands. The first few pages were filled with a flowing, happy, rounded script, full of ecstatic entries about her love for Mason. But the further she read, the tighter, smaller, and sharper the letters became, the lines slanting downward as if weighed down by an unbearable fear. This wasn't just a notebook. It was the chronicle of a soul's slow, methodical murder. Chloe read on, the pages of Kate's diary becoming a mirror of her own nightmare. An entry about hot coffee accidentally spilled on her laptop, destroying her work. Another about a tire unexpectedly going flat on a deserted road late at night. And after each incident, Mason's convincing, logical explanations that made Kate feel crazy and ungrateful. It was their established script, their signature move. Turning another page, a small silver object fell from the diary onto the floor. She picked it up. It was a keychain charm in the shape of a guardian angel. The exact same angel that hung from the keys to Mason's Jaguar. It wasn't a gift. It was a trophy. Just as the cold metal of the charm seared Chloe's palm, the rumble of an engine starting up sounded from outside. She rushed to the window, which overlooked a wild, overgrown part of the garden. Through the branches, she saw the taillights of her in-law's luxury sedan disappearing down the dark forest road. They had left for their charity auction. The lifeline, however illusory, was gone. She was alone in the house, completely alone, with two predators. Her gaze fell on the last hastily scrawled entry in Kate's diary. "They know that I know. He's coming for me." And at that very instant, from just outside her door came the distinct, slow creak of a floorboard. Chloe froze in Kate's room, her fingers clutching the diary so tightly her knuckles turned white. The cold metal of the angel charm felt as heavy as a lead weight. The terror that had paralyzed her for the last few hours receded, replaced by a strange, icy, almost euphoric clarity. She wasn't crazy. Here was the proof. A plan formed in her mind instantly, honed by years of journalistic work, of structuring chaos and finding logic. She would wait for Alex to leave, then present the evidence to Mason. She was still clinging desperately to the idea that Mason was a deceived victim, blinded by brotherly love. This belief, this last thin thread of hope, became her armor and gave her the strength to act. She would save him. She would pull him out of this swamp. Hiding the diary under her sweater, Chloe returned to her room. The house sank into a ringing, oppressive silence, far more terrifying than any scream. It was no longer just silence. It was anticipation. She sat on the edge of the bed, not daring to move, and every sound became an event. A creak of the floorboards above, the click of the thermostat, the distant howl of the wind outside. It was a torture of waiting. She listened, trying to discern the whereabouts of her jailers from the faint rustles, feeling like a mouse hiding in a wall while two cats prowled outside. She wasn't afraid of an attack. She was afraid of missing her one chance to talk to Mason alone. Alex's shadow, elongated under the door, finally slid aside and vanished. Chloe heard his receding footsteps, followed by the soft, distinctive creak of the heavy door leading to the cellar. This was her chance. She waited a few agonizing minutes, counting the seconds by the beating of her own heart, to make sure he wasn't coming back. Then, on tiptoe, she slipped into the hallway and headed for Mason's office on the second floor. But the door was locked from the inside. Panic washed over her in an icy wave. She heard a soft rustle behind her, but when she spun around, she saw only an empty corridor bathed in cold moonlight. The house seems to be mocking her. Deciding not to wait upstairs, she went down to the living room to meet Mason there, on neutral ground. The living room was steeped in twilight, lit only by the cold, lifeless flames of the gas fireplace. Shadows danced on the concrete walls, distorting the room's proportions and turning the designer furniture into the silhouettes of bizarre monsters. As Chloe reached the center of the room, one of the shadows detached itself from the wall at the foot of the stairs. It was Alex. He stood motionless, his face now devoid of any boyish friendliness. "Lost, Chloe?" he asked, in a low, insinuating voice tinged with mockery. "Or are you looking for something?" He didn't walk toward her. He began to circle her slowly, in a wide arc, herding her into the center of the room, cutting off her escape routes. "Where's Mason?" Chloe's voice sounded hollow and faint in the vast, echoing space. Alex smirked, a smile that had nothing in common with his earlier open, boyish grins. It was a predatory, crooked sneer. "Mason is working. He creates perfect worlds, and he doesn't like it when trash gets into his worlds." He took a step forward, stopping so close that Chloe could feel the cold radiating from him. "And you, Chloe, with your questions and suspicions, are starting to look a lot like trash. Just like Kate did. She was a problem too. And my brother and I have a habit of taking out the trash." Instinctively, Chloe pressed a hand to her chest, where the diary was hidden beneath her sweater. Alex's gaze locked onto the gesture. "Ah, so that's it." His eyes lit up with malicious glee. "You found her little treasure. Good for you. She described everything so beautifully, didn't she? Like she was writing a novel. Mason and I actually laughed when we read it. We decided it would be a shame not to use such a good script again. You seemed to like it so much, didn't you?" Every word was a blow, designed not just to intimidate, but to break her spirit, to humiliate and crush her. He wasn't just confessing to a crime. He was boasting about it. Instinct overrode reason. Chloe spun around and lunged for the massive front door of dark wood and metal. She had only taken a few steps before Alex, in one swift, fluid movement, was in front of her, blocking her path. "Now, where are you going?" His voice became hard, almost a snarl. "It's rude to leave without saying goodbye." Chloe tried to slip past him, but he easily caught her by the wrists. His fingers closed like steel bands. She struggled, but his lean body was as solid as a rock. She was trapped, pinned between his body and the cold, locked door. Cornered, knowing she was physically outmatched, Chloe did the only thing she could. She threw her head back and screamed, pouring all her terror, all her desperation, and her last, desperate, irrational belief that Mason was her savior into that one sound. "Mason!" Her voice, amplified by the acoustics of the immense living room, rang out like an alarm, a final plea for help. Alex didn't try to silence her. He only squeezed her wrists a little tighter, forcing a pained cry from her, and looked up at the staircase with a smile of anticipation, as if inviting an audience to the premiere of the final act. High above on the dark second-floor gallery, a light flashed on. The office door opened silently, and the tall, confident figure of Mason appeared in the doorway. He stood looking down, his face unreadable in the shadows. To Chloe, in that moment, he was a knight who had come to her call. Her heart, which a second ago had been ready to burst from her chest with fear, froze in a wave of relief. He saw. He understood. The nightmare was about to end. That thought, that last desperate hope, momentarily eclipsed everything else, granting her the illusion of salvation. Mason didn't run. He didn't hurry. He began to descend the wide, floating staircase with a slow, aristocratic composure. The sound of his expensive shoes on the polished stone steps was the only sound in the deafening silence. He didn't look at Alex, who still held the struggling Chloe. His gaze, cold and heavy, was fixed on Chloe's face. There was no anger in his eyes, no shock, no sympathy, only a deep, almost paternal disappointment, as if he were looking at a beloved pet that had disobeyed him. And that look was more terrifying than any threat. Mason stepped off the last stair and crossed the living room. He passed so close to Chloe that she felt the chill radiate from him, but he didn't even glance her way. He walked up to Alex, who still hadn't released his grip, and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Then, finally, he turned his head to Chloe. "I'm disappointed, Chloe," he said, his voice quiet and even. "I really thought you were the one. You were so close to passing the test." The word test sounded like a death sentence. In one horrifying instant, Chloe's entire world crumbled to dust. Every caring gesture, every soothing word, every logical argument. It wasn't gaslighting. It was part of an exam. A test of silence, of submission, of blindness. And she had failed. He wasn't blinded by his love for his brother. He was the director of this nightmare. She stared into the empty, cold eyes of two monsters, and her last hope died, leaving behind only a scorched wasteland and primal terror. Alex's fingers uncoiled. Chloe took a ragged breath, but didn't move. There was nowhere to run. She stood, paralyzed by horror, in the center of the vast, cold living room, as the Sterling brothers watched her like two judges observing a condemned prisoner before delivering the verdict. "The test was very simple, Chloe," Mason began, in his steady, hypnotic voice, as if delivering a lecture on architecture. He spoke calmly, without a trace of anger, which made his words even more terrifying. "We aren't just looking for a wife. We're looking for a partner in crime, someone who understands and accepts our bond, someone who will keep the family's secrets. Kate was too emotional. She started asking questions. She failed the test. Every word from Mason was another nail he methodically hammered into the lid of her coffin. Chloe looked at him, the man she had loved, the man she was going to make her family, and saw nothing in his eyes but cold, soulless calculation. With predatory grace, Alex walked toward Chloe. Numb with terror, she didn't flinch. He reached under her sweater and pulled out Kate's diary. He flipped through it lazily, his lips twisting into a mocking smile. Then, with a theatrical gesture, he tossed the diary into the artificial flames of the fireplace. The pages, filled with desperate, spiky handwriting, ignited instantly, turning to black ash. Kate's final cry for help vanished in the indifferent fire. "You see," Alex said, dusting off his hands, "all problems can be solved." Mason continued his lecture, his voice just as even and calm. "You had a chance, Chloe. A chance to stay silent. A chance to entrust your life to me, not to your foolish fears. You could have been the queen of this world," he said, gesturing around the perfect, soulless living room. "But you, like Kate, chose curiosity. And curiosity must be punished." There was no more need for pretense. No more words were necessary. The brothers, like two wolves who had shed their sheep's clothing, began to move toward Chloe slowly and in sync, as if on command. Their movements were calculated, cutting off her paths of retreat. The shock that had paralyzed Chloe gave way to a primal terror that forced her to act. She stumbled backward, tripping on a designer rug with an abstract pattern. In an instant, the vast living room transformed into a gladiatorial arena. She backed away until her spine hit something cold and hard, the metal frame of the fireplace. She was trapped. Chloe was pinned against the fireplace. Mason stopped a few feet away, admiring her fear like a connoisseur admiring a painting. He watched her hazel eyes dart around the room, searching for an escape, and decided to prolong his triumph by adding one last drop of poison to her cup of despair. "You can scream if you want, Chloe," he said, with a contemptuous smirk, tapping a fingernail against the gigantic glass wall of the house. The sound was dull, dead. "I personally designed the soundproofing. It's a perfect vacuum. No one will hear you." That sentence, uttered with absolute confidence in his own genius, was his fatal mistake. Soundproofing. The word turned like a key in the lock of Chloe's memory. Her journalist's brain, trained to latch on to the smallest, most insignificant details, instantly replayed a scene. That afternoon, the tour of the house, Mason, brimming with pride in his creation, boasting to his father. His words echoed in her mind with crystalline, life-saving clarity. "And in the fireplace, I installed a clever system, an acoustic trigger. It reacts to high frequencies, like a ringing sound, and instantly increases the draft so smoke doesn't enter the room. My own little professional pride and joy." A meaningless technical detail she had barely registered at the time had, in an instant, become her only, ghostly chance of survival. Chloe's gaze was no longer searching for an escape route. It was fixed on the heavy, wrought-iron fireplace tools standing on a special dark metal stand. She couldn't fight off two strong, fit men with them, but maybe she didn't have to. As the brothers, confident in their absolute victory, slowly closed the distance, she took a step to the side and, with a trembling hand, snatched the most massive tool from the set, the cast-iron poker. Mason and Alex smirked, interpreting it as a final, pathetic gesture of desperation. They didn't understand that her target wasn't them. Mason took a step forward to easily disarm her of this useless weapon. But Chloe, ignoring him, turned to the fireplace. Summoning all her rage, all her fear, and her last desperate hope into a single blow, she slammed the heavy head of the poker with all her might against the steel decorative grate covering the fireplace vent. A deafening, vibrating, almost bell-like clang rang out. The piercing sound ricocheted off the glass and concrete walls, filling the entire space and causing the brothers to freeze instinctively, covering their ears. At that same moment, something clicked quietly near the ceiling, and a low hum began. The ventilation system activating, just as Mason had said. But his professional pride and joy was more complex than he had let on. In Mason's mind, deafened by the ringing, the rest of his sentence to his father surfaced. And of course, I linked the acoustic trigger to the main security system. It reacts to any non-standard sound vibrations. Breaking glass, a gunshot. You never know. His face contorted with a belated, horrifying understanding. Before Mason could do anything, the perfect silence of the house was shattered by the deafening, pulsating wail of a security siren. Simultaneously, blinding red strobes flashed to life on the ceiling, bathing the perfect minimalist interior in a bloody, jarring, apocalyptic light. Mason's perfect, soundproof trap had instantly become a roaring beacon, its signal already received at the private security firm located just 3 miles away. A cascade of emotions washed over the brothers' faces, from bewilderment to fury, and finally to a raw, animal fear. Alex jerked toward the smart home touchscreen embedded in the wall and began stabbing at the screen frantically. But a short, merciless message glowed on the display. System locked. Alarm active. Mason stared at Chloe, and for the first time his eyes held no control, no superiority. Only panic. His perfect world, his fortress, his creation, had just betrayed him. He had been outplayed on his own field, by his own rules. Chloe stood, breathing heavily, clutching the poker. She had won. The wail of the siren grew louder, now mixed with the sound of gravel crunching under the tires of a heavy vehicle. Moments later, the panoramic window was flooded with the blinding glare of headlights. Chloe saw 2 large men in uniform jump out of a large black SUV with security emblazoned on its side. She hadn't used strength. She had used knowledge. Knowledge her enemy had carelessly provided. Her transformation was complete. She no longer trusted words, only facts. The heavy front door scraped open with a master key. Guards with weapons drawn burst into the house. They froze on the threshold, taking in the surreal scene. 2 wealthy, impeccably dressed men frozen in impotent rage, and a disheveled girl in dirty clothes, a poker in her hand, standing in the center of the room amidst the hellish wail of the siren and the flashing red lights. One of the guards, staring at her in shock, yelled over the noise, "Ma'am, what happened here?" Chloe slowly lowered the poker. She looked at her defeated enemies, at their faces twisted with fury and fear, and a crooked smile touched her lips. "Just a family dinner that got a little out of hand."